right. Well, thanks for joining me this afternoon, Todd.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to be on the show.
Well, I think the first thing I wanted to start off with is just kind of some basic questions about you. I
Sure.
know that you are a pastor in the Philadelphia Presbytery, and also have some work on the Presbytery as well.
Yeah, I wear many hats.
Yes, you do.
So I'm the pastor at Gladwin Presbyterian Church, which, as you noted, is just outside the city of Philadelphia.
Mhm.
It's a suburban region of the city. I also do some consulting with the Presbytery overall with its public witness efforts, where we focus on some of the major issues that are hitting the city of gun violence and
Mhm.
environmental concerns, ecological concerns, and immigration. So that's another thing that I do. Um, in the past, I've been active with Presbyterians for Middle East Peace, but more recently, been more active with Pathways, which is a multi-denominational entity that seeks to sort of build up the middle, the center in the debate over Israel and Palestine.
Mhm.
Uh, Working primarily with many of the groups in Israel and Palestine that are trying to build bridges to provide for a stronger place for peaceful efforts. Because the extremists have, right now the extremists control the dialogue, and it gets us nowhere.
Can you tell me a little bit about your work with Presbyterians for Middle East Peace and the organization itself?
Sure. So, Presbyterians for Middle East Peace kind of came out of the Presbyterian Jewish dialogue that was taking place in the 80s and 90s, and PFMEP really came together as an entity when the denomination began discussing divestment.
Hmm.
And PFMEP really kind of most of its work was revolving around the issue of divestment and trying to defeat the calls for divestment, believing that it was sort of like the wrong policy for the wrong issues at the wrong time.
Hmm.
We think the fact that Presbyterian Church has very little say in what happens in Israel and Palestine right now certainly speaks to the reality of what our concerns were back then. Since that time, it's been a loose organization made up of clergy and lay members of the denomination who are concerned with the increasingly shrill voices that we're hearing in the denomination as it relates to Israel. Um, we think that the strong connections that have developed between the denomination and the BDS movement is something that has hurt our standing with the American Jewish community, who, for the most part, share our very same concerns about what has happened in the state of Israel and the lack of the peace process. So we found ourselves alienated from partners for peace because of the work that supporters of the BDS movement within the denomination have done. I think many in the national offices have bought into the BDS narrative. So while the denomination hasn't necessarily made any statements in support of the BDS, we have entities like the Peace and Compassion Office, as well as the Israel-Palestine Mission Network, who are wholeheartedly a part of the BDS movement in terms of what they advocate, in terms of how they talk, that sort of thing. And so our work has been mostly to provide an alternative vision with alternative strategies of how we could be better moving to support the peace efforts. I think one of the things that unfortunately has occurred, and we're seeing it in this most recent war, is many of the mainline denominations, including Peace USA, have been using rhetoric of saying the the two-state scenario solution is over.
Hmm.
And when you say things like that, because words matter, if it's going to be one state, then whose state is it going to be?
Hmm.
You get the maximalist right-wing Israelis who will say it's going to be a Jewish state and there will be no Palestinians allowed. And you get the maximalist Palestinians who say we are going to drive the Israelis, the Jews, out of the land. We can't get away from that. We have extremists on both sides. They will never be happy until there are two states living side by side. The Palestinian state for the Palestinian community and the Israeli state for the Jewish community. And what we're seeing is, Hamas, an atrocious, murderous organization who has no designs on peace, whose only goal is to kill Jews. Mm-hmm. This is not a liberating entity. If they were a liberating entity, they would be providing shelter for their own people right now, but they're not. Hamas has once again put their own people in jeopardy. Hamas has shown who it is with just the ruthless atrocities that occurred on October 7th. Just unspeakable. And a large part of that can be attributed to some of the language that they've heard coming from the states, the progressive communities that have been highly critical of Israel, who have labeled Israel all sorts of things, an apartheid state, a racist state, nothing but a colonial state. And they see that rhetoric, they hear that rhetoric, and they take actions to further isolate Israel. Whenever Hamas needs to get PR, they launch rockets. Mm-hmm. It serves them. They are able to raise money off the issue because they know Israel will respond as any state would to an attack. They will then claim, a disproportional response. Israel will try and strike Hamas sites. We know now through all the investigation that's taking place that Hamas puts command and control facilities under hospitals, inside UN buildings. They store weapons in schools and hospitals and UN buildings. And they want civilian casualties because that plays up to their view that Israel just indiscriminately kills Palestinians. And we know that that's not the case. Any rational person knows that that's not the case. But we see the influence in the fact that we have so many people speaking about how this is a genocide. Mm-hmm. There have been unfortunate civilian casualties. Innocent people have died. And I grieve over that. But a genocide would mean that all 2 million residents of Gaza are at risk. And we're not seeing that. Nor are we seeing anything equivalent to genocide taking place in the West Bank. And that doesn't even account for the millions of Palestinians who live in places like Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria waiting for a two-state scenario. So all this language that gets used mostly on the progressive side of the political spectrum just further creates a fertile ground for Hamas to act. And Peace USA and other mainline denominations are part of that problem.
All right.